is considered the most prolific serial killer in Brazil's history. His life and crime shocked not only the Brazilian people, but also criminologists around the world, who still debate his unique profile. Pedro was born in 1954, in the small town of Santa Rita do Sapucaí, in the state of Minas Gerais. From the very beginning, his life was marked by violence. Even before he was born, his father brutally beat his pregnant mother. That act of violence caused Pedro to be born with a deformed skull. Later in life, Pedro himself would claim that this prenatal trauma shaped his destiny, leading him down a path of violence and bloodshed. As a child, Pedro displayed signs of aggression and rebellion. He was often involved in fights and showed little fear of confrontation. At just 13 years old, he committed his first murder. The victim was the deputy mayor of his town. Pedro believed that this man had unfairly fired his father from a job at the local school, accusing him of stealing food. Seeking revenge, the young boy armed himself with a shotgun and killed the deputy mayor in broad daylight. Not long after, Pedro committed his second murder. This time, the victim was a security guard whom he believed was the true thief responsible for the accusation against his father. These early killings demonstrated a pattern that would follow Pedro throughout his life. His murders were often driven by revenge or a twisted sense of justice. In his teenage years, Pedro fled to São Paulo, one of Brazil's largest cities. It was there that his criminal career escalated. He became involved with organized crime, quickly gaining a reputation for being ruthless and efficient. By the age of 18, he had already killed dozens of people. His targets were not only enemies or rivals, but also those he believed to be criminals themselves, drug dealers, thieves, and gang members. In his own mind, he was cleansing society of those who did wrong. Pedro also lived a turbulent personal life. He fell in love with a woman named Maria Aparecida Olympia, with whom he shared a passionate but dangerous relationship. Maria was eventually murdered by members of a rival gang. Enraged, Pedro went on a brutal killing spree, taking the lives of several people connected to her death. This period solidified his reputation as both feared and untouchable within São Paulo's criminal underworld. In 1973, Pedro was arrested for the first time. At that point, he was just 19 years old but had already confessed to over 40 murders. His arrest, however, did not end his killing spree. Inside prison, he became even more dangerous. Pedro claimed that prison was a paradise for him because it placed him among the very people he most despised: thieves, rapists, and murderers. He continued his mission of executing those he considered unworthy of living. One of the most shocking episodes occurred during his transport to prison. While being escorted in a police van alongside another criminal, Pedro killed the man before they even arrived. Once inside prison, his tally of victims grew rapidly. He murdered fellow inmates with knives, razors, and sometimes even with his bare hands. By some estimates, Pedro killed at least 47 inmates during his time in prison. Among his most infamous murders was the killing of his own father. Pedro's father had been imprisoned for the brutal murder of Pedro's mother. When Pedro learned of this, he hunted down his father inside the prison and killed him during a visit. Reports state that Pedro not only stabbed his father multiple times, but also cut out his heart and chewed a piece of it. This shocking act horrified both authorities and the public, reinforcing his image as a merciless killer. Over time, Pedro's story gained widespread attention in Brazil and internationally. Some people compared him to vigilante characters, claiming he was like a real-life Dexter, targeting criminals instead of innocent people. However, criminologists argue that his sense of justice was twisted, and many of his victims were chosen based on personal grudges or suspicions, rather than solid evidence of guilt. In 2003, after spending decades in prison, Pedro was finally released. He had served 34 years, longer than his original sentence. But freedom did not last long. Within a few years, he was arrested again for crimes including threats and theft. Despite his age, he continued to be involved in violence. Surprisingly, in recent years, Pedro reinvented himself in the digital age. He became a figure on YouTube, where he gave interviews and shared his life story. In these appearances, he often expressed regret for some of his actions, but also justified many of his killings as necessary. His online presence attracted curiosity and controversy, turning him into a bizarre celebrity. Pedro Rodrigues Filho died in March 2023 at the age of 68. Reports say he was ambushed and executed by gunmen in the state of São Paulo. The news of his death shocked Brazil once again, as many people believed his violent past had finally caught up to him. Pedro's life raises many questions about violence, justice, and the human psyche. Was he a product of his environment and traumatic upbringing, or was he destined for violence from the very start? While some people still view him as a vigilante who punished criminals, others see him as nothing more than a cold-blooded murderer. In the end, the story of Pedro Rodrigues Filho is a chilling reminder of how thin the line can be between justice and vengeance, and how a life marked by violence can leave behind a legacy that is both fascinating and terrifying.